I have said this before, there has never been a better time to get into hi-fi and become an audiophile, because in 2022 you really don't need to spend a lot of money to get some very good sounding hi-fi speakers. And I have been looking at some brand new entry-level speakers from Acoustic Energy, the long-established English speaker manufacturer. And I think at the entry level, the more affordable end of the speaker market, the competition is fierce. And that really pushes manufacturers to really push the boundaries of what they can offer from their speakers at the more affordable end, at that level of price. And I think that's great for the audiophile. And I have 3 different of what you might call champion entry-level speakers here to compare, because I wanted to find out, are the brand new AE100 Mk2 from Acoustic Energy the best compact stand mount speaker you can buy today? And let me assure you, there are some surprises ahead. And this is my 3rd Acoustic Energy stand mount speaker review, and I have always been impressed with their speakers for their build quality, for their aesthetics, and definitely for their sound quality. And with the AE100 Mk2, that is definitely no exception. I was instantly impressed with the AE100 Mk2's extremely compact form factor with nice curved edges, a high quality fit and finish, and I have no complaints in any way for a speaker at this price, which is £259. And this pair is finished in walnut, and I think it's a nice finish. It blends modern and contemporary. And of course, don't forget to remove the cover over the badge, because it makes all the difference. And my previous experience with the Acoustic Energy AE3 and 500 stand mount speakers is that their sound is always very even-handed, always very nicely balanced, not trying to push things too extreme in any area, just nice and even-handed, very easy to listen to and nicely balanced. And you could say maybe they're playing it a little safe, not trying to push too far one way or the other, but the positive of that is there is no negatives. There is never anything there that can really stand out as a negative, and it makes the speakers very enjoyable to listen to. So naturally, I was expecting the same kind of house sound from the AE100 Mk2, which are a 2-way speaker using a 25mm fabric dome tweeter that sits in a waveguide and uses Acoustic Energy's wide dispersion technology. And the tweeter is supported by a 130mm or 5 and a bit inch paper mid-bass driver that crosses over at 2.9 kHz, so quite high. The speakers are rated to 120 watts with 6 ohms impedance, and they have a sensitivity of 87 decibels, so all fairly standard. But what's not standard is the speaker's cabinet. And Acoustic Energy, I think, have been really clever here. They told me they wanted to be able to get more bass from the exact same size speaker as the original AE100, because they knew their customers liked the aesthetically pleasing compact form factor, but they wanted to achieve a bit more bass from the speaker. So what they did was make the speaker using HDF and not MDF. And the HDF has allowed them to use slightly thinner panels, keeping the exact same size of speaker and the same rigidity of the speaker, obviously for acoustic properties, but the thinner panels has increased the internal volume. So a higher or larger internal volume means they can get more bass from the exact same size speaker. And I actually think that's really clever. I would say that is very much, up there for thinking and down there for dancing. And I'm sure it's not much bigger in terms of the internal volume, but when you're talking about a speaker that is this compact, every millimeter counts. And I'm sure most of you can relate to that. And I was definitely impressed with the AE100's bass performance to a point, but we'll talk more about that in a second. And setting them up was fairly straightforward, and it wasn't hard for me to find a good spot in my room and then the right amount of towing for the best sound. And just a quick point on towing, I actually liked the sound of the AE100's towed in a reasonable amount, but I did find the treble presence region could be just a little bit too hot, which meant that there was a little bit too much sibilance presented in music, and I am quite sensitive to this. So I actually found that towing the speakers out a bit more created the best balanced overall sound and took away the sibilance that I just mentioned. But in terms of their placement in my new room, I am prioritizing a system setup that gives me as much soundstage as possible, so as much depth, width and height as I can get. And I placed the AE100 Mk2 about a meter from the front wall to allow them to image really well. And that was definitely the first thing that really stood out to me. That is their soundstage, because it is huge. It's really wide, really wide. It is deep at times and really tall at times. And I found that massively impressive. And it's also very, very open. You just feel like you can really see through onto the music, and it's very wide, tall and at times deep soundstage. Really very impressive. And they sound like much more expensive speakers in that regard. And there is a lot of obvious higher frequencies energy within music, which can create, like I said, a sense of height. But more important than that, it can create a sense of ambience, a real sense of you being there type of ambience, which is really, really interesting and again, impressive for these types of speakers. And that definitely is a big positive when you listen to live type of music. Anything with any kind of room ambience type sound, it's definitely a positive when you listen to that type of music. And the tweeter must be a big part of this in how it's presenting the higher or maybe air high frequencies. But some of this I think must also be the speaker's cabinet. Obviously it's small, so there are minimal panel vibrations anyway, but I'm guessing the HDF might be helping here for the speaker's overall transparency, which is again excellent for the money. And I think their bass delivery will be a part of this as well, because they can deliver really quite a punchy bass with the right music. And of course we know Acoustic Energy have squeezed as much bass out of the very compact speaker size as they can, but they are still compact speakers, so will be limited in their bass output. But in the main, so long as I didn't go crazy with the volume, the AE100 Mk2 delivered a very clean, enjoyable sound with, as I have said, an excellent soundstage. Vocals are nicely carved out in the centre, and they had really quite punchy, very tight and focused bass. And I will admit, I was sitting there thinking to myself, how is this possible? How have they achieved this from a £259 speaker? But then it was time to pull out the other champion entry-level speakers to test to see just how good the Acoustic Energy AE100 Mk2 really are, and I was not going to make it easy for them. First up was the Q Acoustics 3030i, which originally retailed for £369, I think, but now you can buy them for £269. And the 3030i are significantly larger, almost twice as deep, and they feature a larger 6.5-inch mid-bass driver and the same sized but decoupled soft dome tweeter. And I think both speakers look modern, but the overall form factor of the Acoustic Energy is nicer. But no surprise, listening to the 3030i, they sounded much more substantial in their bass, for extension and their output at the deeper notes. And I definitely like this aspect about them, because it helps to warm their overall sound, and it helps to make vocals, especially male vocals, sound more masculine and natural. And this was easily noticeable listening to Gregory Porter's Hey Laura. And the extra bass extension helps the music to sound bigger, and it feels more like you are listening to small floor standing speakers, just in terms of the amount of bass presence there is in the room. The 3030i's treble is possibly slightly snappier than the Acoustic Energies, which definitely stood out as a positive, but overall the treble of the 3030i is much more reserved for extension, and they are less exciting as speakers as a result. But maybe the treble is a touch snappier when you focus on specific details in music. However, overall I found the 3030i to sound quite disjointed by comparison to the new AE100. There was no real defined soundstage across the width of my room, and no real sense of depth to the soundstage either. And it was like the speaker's timing and balance was just nowhere near as composed. And the AE100 didn't dig anywhere near as deep for the bass, but to my surprise the bass was tighter and definitely punchier in some music. And putting them back on, that sense of air, that high frequency ambience that I was really enjoying came back, and that was definitely a positive. So there were some pros and cons here, as you obviously would expect, but for me, out of the two speakers, I feel like the new Acoustic Energy is definitely the better speaker of the two, or the speaker that I preferred listening to more. And I actually think that is a pretty big win for the new AE100 Mk2 when you consider the starting price of the Q Acoustics 3030i. But the next competitor was going to be much tougher, because when you think of top performing entry level hi-fi speakers, one designer and manufacturer instantly springs to mind, and that is Andrew Jones and Elac. And their debut two DB5.2 speakers are extremely comparable because they also cost £259 and feature a 5 and a bit inch aramid fibre mid-bass driver with a 1 inch silk dome tweeter that also sits in a waveguide. But there are big differences here too, such as front ported with the Elac and rear slot ported with the Acoustic Energy. I think visually the AE100 are the much nicer looking speakers, but maybe you would prefer the old school nostalgia look of the Elac. One other big difference is the size. The Elac are noticeably taller and on paper dig a bit deeper in their bass, 46Hz compared to 51Hz, which doesn't sound like a lot of hertz, but in reality I've found that between around 50Hz and around 40Hz, there can be quite a significant difference in terms of the overall sound quality, and there was one here. The Elac seemed to split the difference in bass between the Q Acoustics and the Acoustic Energy. The bass is tighter and smoother than the Q Acoustics, but there is not as much of it. But it does sound more extended and even smoother than the AE100s, but the AE100s sound punchier in some music. So that means Gregory Porter's voice is a little more convincing on the Elac compared to the Acoustic Energy, but listening to Runners by Soichi Terada, which is what I would call audiophile electronic music, the bass is more fun with the Acoustic Energy. But listening to a wide variety of music showed me that the Elac sound more composed, tightly focused, and probably the more evenly balanced of the two speakers. They really are very impressive in that regard. The Elac soundstage is not as open or as wide as the Acoustic Energy, but they are still impressive for their soundstage and definitely better than the Q Acoustics. And the Elac, I think, sounded more tonally saturated or maybe tonally convincing compared to the Acoustic Energy, probably because there is just a bit more bass there, but also quite a bit less treble. So the Elac are the warmer sounding speaker of the two, and a warmer sounding speaker will normally naturally sound more tonally rich and saturated anyway. And to put this into a music context, Melody Gardot's Live in Europe album showed me very clearly some major differences. At the beginning of the song Wayfaring Stranger, there is the crowd cheering, followed by I think a double bass solo, and both speakers were able to render the instrument behind them in the soundstage with a good level of detail and fairly three-dimensionally, which is extremely impressive for speakers at this money. But the extra fullness and tone of the Elac meant they were a little more convincing at portraying this big-bodied wood instrument. And Melody's voice that follows was a touch more focused, with a stronger, again, more fullness of tone from the Elac. But rewinding things back to the beginning of this song, where the crowd are cheering, the AE100 render this part of the song really impressive because, like I mentioned, there is just this sense of ambience. There is much more or a much greater sense of actually being there because of all this high frequency ambient information that is all completely missing with the Elac. So I would guess that the Elac's treble is more rolled off, whereas maybe the Acoustic Energy's treble is a little bit rising in the upper air type frequencies. And I didn't use Dirac Live at all for this review and for these comparisons, so I can't show you any measurements, and I could go on and describe similar differences across a variety of music. But to keep it simple, the Elac sound technically very good, very tight, very precise and focused, with an excellent soundstage, and likely because they are a little larger can deliver a bit more bass extension, therefore have a bit more tonality to them in critical areas of the upper bass and lower mid-range, and that combined with the more rolled off treble makes them sound warmer and probably more pleasing across a wider variety of music, or a wider variety of music quality. And the AE100 Mk2, you know what? They're not that far behind the best strengths of the Elac speakers. So from Acoustic Energy's point of view, if they've created a speaker that's smaller, compact, nicer looking, that's able to, in a way, go toe-to-toe with an Elac speaker designed by Andrew Jones, well then Acoustic Energy have definitely done something right here. And that higher frequency information from the Acoustic Energy AE100 Mk2 is really a big thing, actually. I've really enjoyed and appreciated that for certain types of music, or in certain types of music. Like I said, live music where there's a crowd, or where you're trying to, enjoy or appreciate that an ambience, any type of ambience. But I think the downside of that can be with some music that is produced or sounds very shrill, maybe like some older Madonna music. Well, then I think that higher frequency, extra high frequency information is just not as pleasing to listen to as the more maybe warmer, rolled off sound of the Elac. But before I close out this review, what happens if you want it all? What happens if you want that extra high frequency information, the ambience type of retrieval with that very open and wide and clear, precise soundstage of the AE100 Mk2, but you also want a bit more fullness and a bit more bass saturation and tone to the sound? Well, there's an easy fix, isn't there? You just add a subwoofer or subwoofers. And Acoustic Energy sell a subwoofer to match the 100, or a subwoofer in the 100 range, called the AE100. And I really think that if you set up subwoofers, set them up well, you could add all that tonality, fullness and bass, and then you would have a really excellent, compelling sounding hi-fi system for really not that much money, that's perfectly good for, a medium-sized room like what I have here. But interestingly, I think if you was looking at speakers for a smaller type of room, maybe a bedroom type of system or any type of smaller room, well then you wouldn't have to worry so much about the bass type of situation, and then the AE100 Mk2 would be a very, very compelling option and a very interesting option. But just quickly, maybe on system choices to match with them, I would probably say, just as a starting point, maybe look for an amplifier that is on the slightly warmer side of neutral. I'm just saying that because the hi-fi system I have here is a pretty neutral one, and just a little bit more warmth I think would just help just balance their sound out really nicely. But obviously every room, system setup and ears are slightly different, so that's just a starting point recommendation. So I hope you've enjoyed this review. I hope you found it useful and helpful. If you did, hit the thumbs up button and subscribe to the Pursuit of Perfect System YouTube channel if you haven't already. Of course you have. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye.